Welcome to Sky Women. I'm your host, Dr. Carolyn Moyers, a wife, mom, and board-certified OB-GYN. This is a place to educate, empower, and inspire. Join us each week as we share the power of women's stories. Real women, real stories, real inspiration. Put on your stretchy pants. Let's get going. Welcome back, Sky Women. Welcome to another episode. Today, we have a special guest with us. We are going to be talking all about nutrition. I believe everybody wants to eat better, but doesn't necessarily know how or where to start. So let me introduce Ann Kent. She is a registered dietitian, a Farm-Girl-Turned-Dietitian who helps busy families get dinner on the table and is picky eater approved. So welcome, Ann.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey in nutrition and why this is so meaningful to you?
Of course. So like you said, in my tagline, I'm a Farm-Girl-Turned-Dietitian because I grew up on a farm in central Kansas. And as I made my way into the nutrition world and became a clinician, I found that a lot of the clients who I was working with I really had no idea where their food came from on one end. And on the other end, they also were really struggling with knowing how to nourish their bodies well, or, feeling like healthy food didn't taste good or it was inaccessible for some reason. And then even if they wanted to eat well, there was this other barrier of not knowing how or not having time to get a healthy dinner on the table. So these three silos kind of emerged in my mind. There was the agriculture, growing the food. And then there was the nutrition piece, nourishing your body. And then the third silo is cooking and just the practical aspect of making food. And so my ultimate goal with Peas and Hoppiness and the Meal Guide membership that I have is to unite those three silos and to help give people a resource that uses seasonal vegetables that you can find locally in your area, teaches you the techniques and makes cooking at home really easy and accessible in a way that nourishes your body and family. And you don't have to spend hours thinking about all of those things and wondering if you're in the right place.
Perfect. Because no busy mom has time for that in this day and age.
And nobody does. You're absolutely right.
All right. So tell me a little bit about the name, because I know you enjoy food puns, but Peas and Hoppiness is super cute.
Yeah. So my website and my business actually started out as just a hobby blog about 6 or 7 years ago now. And my mom had been encouraging me. She was like, "Oh, you should write, like you enjoy this." And so I was just like brainstorming things. And like you said, I love food puns. So I was thinking through different food puns, and the peas really comes from peace with food, that I practice from an intuitive eating approach, that I think we all have the answers to how we need to eat within ourselves, and rather than having someone externally tell you what or how much you need to eat. And so that's what that peas is all about. Peace with food. And then Hoppiness is about the other side of food, that food is not just to nourish our bodies, but it's also to nourish our souls. Mm-hmm. And so emotional eating is not always a bad thing, but we need to understand, when you're hungry emotionally, we need to feed that side of you too. So whether you're enjoying food with friends or whether you're trying to find a healthy coping mechanism to deal with stress, like that's the aspect that I want to bring in as well.
Right. That's so cute. All right. I get it. Peace and happiness versus peace and happiness. Okay.
You got it. Absolutely. Yes. And I happened to just I was brewing beer at the time, and that's where the hop came from. And I live in, Fort Collins, Colorado, where we have like a brewery per every 5 people, I think. So that's why we have Hoppiness.
Cute. Okay. You brought up intuitively eating. What does that mean?
Great question. And I think it's a term that is thrown around a lot and somewhat misunderstood. So intuitive eating, there's actually 10 different pieces of intuitive eating. It's very deep. But intuitive eating is all about understanding how to nourish your body and understanding that comes within yourself. So there's lots of different pieces. There's one of the tenets is giving up dieting, is totally rejecting the diet culture that we live in, which is a lot easier said than done. A lot easier said than done. You can think that you've given up diet culture and it just sneaks back in.
Right.
But you have to do that in order to be able to understand your hunger cues, for example, which is another tenet of intuitive eating. So many of us have lost our ability to understand when we're hungry and when we're full, either because we've been on a diet and somebody else has told us when or how much we should eat, right, or simply because we're busy and you didn't have time to eat lunch, or like you were chasing the kids all day and like snacking off their plates. And so you didn't even have time to think about, am I hungry or am I stressed or like what's going on? So intuitive eating it takes aspects of things like mindful eating, but it also takes some of those like physiological reasons that we need to eat and kind of puts them all together into how do you eat well for yourself without being on a diet?
Right. Awesome. Yeah. Diets are hard. I think that so many people wind up yo-yo dieting because they try it out and it's so strict, and then they're angry, they're hungry.
Right. Yeah.
And it's not sustainable. So I love this idea of intuitively eating and really paying attention to your body.
And that's one of the things about intuitive eating is that a lot of the science shows that part of the reason why diets don't work is because of that deprivation. Our bodies are designed to protect us. And I think it's really important to always remember that when you go on a diet, your body sees that as a famine that you're entering into. And so it's automatically going to do everything it can to prevent you from losing any weight, which could be very dangerous for your survival. And it's also going to regain that weight as quickly as possible because, again, it's trying to protect you from starving to death. So when we're trying to find a healthy weight balance, it's really important to do that in a way that doesn't scare your body, if that makes sense. Yeah. Which is what diets can do. And I think it's important to hear that, diets fail because of the diet, not because of the person. So often people are blamed, but if you look around, the reason why we have so many different diets, it's not the person, it's the diet industry.
Okay. I love that. We need to say that again. We need to have a bumper sticker made because it's not your fault. It's not intuitive eating. Therefore, there's a reason why people yo-yo diet. There's a reason why people are not sustaining their lifestyle on a particular diet because it's not a natural way of eating. It's not right. Darn diet industry. Okay. We kind of skipped ahead because I wanted you to explain to us, like, just big picture bird's eye view for those of us who don't know, for someone who doesn't have access to you to sit down and go through nutrition, whether it's food allergies or whether it's just wanting to feed their families better or whatever. What's the difference between a nutritionist and a dietitian? What should we be looking for?
Yeah, who should you listen to? That's a great question because there are a lot of people who put themselves out there as experts. So I am a registered dietitian nutritionist. That's my full title. Sometimes you'll also see us called registered dietitians. So RD or RDN is the credential after the name. And the dietitian differs from a nutritionist in that the registered dietitian has to have we have to have a bachelor's degree in nutrition, a minimum of a bachelor's degree, which actually is going to change to a master's degree soon. But in addition to that, we also have to have practice hours of hands-on clinical community and food service hours that we complete. And then we have to pass a national registration exam and renew our certification with continuing education every 5 years. So the term registered dietitian or registered dietitian nutritionist is really protected and requires a lot of upkeep. Whereas a nutritionist is a general term and doesn't have any protections behind it. So some nutritionists...
For an RDN.
I'm sorry?
We should be looking for an RDN, registered dietitian nutritionist.
Right. RD or RDN. Both, they're interchangeable actually. But yes, that's what we want to look for.
Perfect. Okay. So I think I mentioned this before. Most people know that they need to eat better, but they just don't really know how. Mm-hmm. How do you kind of unfold this? Where do you even start? How do you help people to kind of work through improving their diets?
Great question, especially when I'm telling you that you shouldn't be on a diet. So well, then what do you do? Yeah. So what I tell people is the answer is simple, but it's not easy. Really, when you think about it, there's two things that go into how you should eat to fuel your body. And that will equal good health outcomes and your body's happiest weight and good energy and all these things. The first one is to eat when you're hungry and not when you're full. And that comes with a long line of caveats, but very simply to really tune into your own hunger cues, because your body will tell you when it needs fuel. So that's number one, eat when you're hungry, not when you're full. And the second is to eat in a balance of quality food. So it is true that if you're simply, it's much, much harder for your body to regulate hunger cues if we're eating very like ultra processed foods, because many of the foods in our culture now have been condensed essentially. And a good example of this might be the difference between eating an apple compared to eating apple juice, or an orange compared to orange juice. If you've ever squeezed your own orange juice, you know how many oranges it takes to make a glass of orange juice. It takes a lot. So it's very easy to drink an entire glass of orange juice, and probably you're not going to sit down and eat 4 oranges in a sitting. But that sort of processing of different foods, and you can see that across the industry, whether it's chips or whatever, that's going to kind of mess with your hunger cues. So that's why you have to take those two steps together. You do have to learn how to listen to your body and its hunger. And you also have to be eating in a balance of protein and quality carbohydrates and fruits and vegetables with some of the other soul food in there as well.
So you're saying that maybe we can have some of that soul food, some of that comfort food, but it needs to be in proportion with our whole foods and with our vegetables and fruits.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I like to think of it more as, let's focus on making sure that you're having enough of things. I think a lot of times the problem with dieting is that it focuses on what you should take out, but we don't talk very often about what your body actually needs. And that's why you're left hungry or you're left unsatisfied. And so, whether it's saying, well, have I had enough? Have I had any vegetables today? Have I had my antioxidants? Have I had my protein in my beans or legumes or whatever it is, but also not just talking about the physical nourishment that we need, but to also talk about the emotional hunger. So a lot of times we're turning to these ultra processed foods, either because we're busy or we're stressed or we need something fast, or, maybe it's a coping mechanism. And so rather than, you're right, absolutely. And it's not wrong, it's not wrong to eat it for that. But the problem comes when we don't have other coping mechanisms to rely on. And if food is our only coping mechanism when we're stressed, that's just like any other coping mechanism. And it could be something as unhealthy as, alcohol or drugs, or as healthy as exercise. Anytime you overuse one single coping mechanism, bad things happen and we get out of balance. So that's what I would say is more important, a balance of those two things, making sure you have enough and that you're fueling all parts of your body and soul.
Love it. Okay, let's talk a little bit about intermittent fasting or circadian fasting, because that is a really big thing right now that I'm hearing all around. And whenever when I think about it, circadian fasting just seems so natural, right? I mean, stop eating as it's evening time and you let your gut rest. I mean, I feel like I can do 12 hours of intermittent fasting easy. It's when we get into the more extreme, 14, 16, 24 hours that I'm like, whoa, is that really necessary?
Right.
So talk to us a little bit about the benefits, how we should be using it. And I know it varies around a woman's cycle as well. Like you're not going to be able to do any extreme fasting leading up to your cycle in that week prior.
Right. All of those are really important things to remember. And I will also kind of put in a caveat that intermittent fasting is a little bit counter to intuitive eating, or it can be. So we have to be a little bit careful with that. So I would say like the circadian fasting that you're talking about can really easily be integrated with intuitive eating, because it is very natural. And our hormones actually follow a natural circadian rhythm as well. You can probably talk about this better than I can. But for example, insulin is not as well used overnight as it is during the day. Our sensitivity decreases overnight. And because we're not supposed to be eating, that's a time when we're supposed to be resting. And so our body is not expecting food. And if you take in food, then you'll have higher blood sugar spikes because your body is not prepared to eat at that time. So some of those circadian rhythms and circadian fasting can be really helpful, I would say, in getting in tune with hunger, and it can be kind of used alongside intuitive eating, as long as you understand that if you accidentally didn't eat enough for dinner and you wake up at 2 a.m. and you're starving, you should break your fast because your body is telling you you need to eat. So now we can problem solve that later, because it's really not ideal to wake up at 2 a.m. and eat every night for a lot of reasons, not just because it's a circadian rhythm, but you first need to honor your biological hunger before you can maybe integrate some of those fasting regimens. So again, this is sort of like we could talk for hours about this because there's a lot of new emerging research, but some of the research around and why intermittent fasting is popular is because there's some evidence that the longer fasts can decrease your risk of some types of cancer and different things like that. It is not to be used if you've ever struggled with any sort of disordered eating or eating disorders, because that can be very, very triggering. And it's not something that's necessary. So it can be a helpful tool. Our bodies were designed to go through famines, and we've been fasting for millennia in different religions or different, just because we didn't have access to food. So,
right. We didn't always have Jack in the Box or
exactly
Chick-fil-A on the corner, right? So yeah, you definitely went through periods of not eating.
Right. So it's a very natural thing for humans, but we live in a little bit different world than we did 100 or 200 or 1,000 years ago, in which dieting is such a prevalent piece in our world, and food is so emotional and psychological that I think that honoring
it's
that
social. Don't you believe? Very social. Yeah,
absolutely. And there's a lot of research that shows that social connections are as important or even more important than things like diet and exercise. It's right up there. And so if you're sacrificing so much of your joy because you have to be fasting for a certain amount of time, then I would really question whether that's in your best health interest.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Fascinating topics. We're just like piquing the interest, because I feel we could almost have a conversation about each one of these individually. But tell us about, you've left the traditional clinical setting and you have this online program. Tell us a little bit about, there's a busy mom who's like, wow, I really need help with this. How can I feed myself and my family better? Tell us how they can work with you.
Yes. So you're describing the Peas and Hoppy Meal Guide membership, which I created when I came up with the idea when I was working as a clinical dietitian in an outpatient endocrinology clinic and seeing diabetes patients primarily. But, I just encountered so many people who really had the desire to change, but didn't have the tools to do it and didn't have the time, to be honest, to make these changes. And that's what I wanted to take off people's plates. Forgive the pun, but honestly, to save people from having to search for recipes or to wonder if the thing was healthy that you're trying to make. A lot of times I would hear people say, gosh, we're just in this food rut. Like, I just need new ideas. And so
you're describing me exactly.
Yeah, we all get there, even if you're excited, even if you love food, even if you're a foodie, because you just are busy with your life. So I created this membership to send my members. I send them a weekly menu with recipes that I test in my house, in my own kitchen with my, multiple eaters. So it's a very practical way of eating. I am very passionate about not sending people to 4 different specialty grocery stores to find ingredients. So everything on the recipes is really practical. And I call these meal guides rather than meal plans because, to be honest, no one can make a meal plan for your family except for you. And there are so many people that will tell you that they can make you a meal plan, but if someone else is making it, it's probably not going to work. And again, it's not your fault. It's the meal plan's fault, because in our lives, we have soccer practice scheduled on Tuesday, but then at the last minute, we have a work meeting that we didn't know we needed to get to. And so even when you plan ahead, sometimes things can go awry. So part of the membership is teaching you how to deal with those interruptions that just come with life. So I take the pressure off wondering if your recipe is going to be good. I save you the time of, searching for what you should get on the table. I give you variety, and you get the chance to plug and play and make it work for your life.
I love it. So tell everyone where they can find you.
I'm online at peasandhoppiness.com. So that's Peas and then Hoppiness, HO with an O. I'm also on Instagram and Facebook at Peas and Hoppiness.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Anne.
Thank you for your time. It was such a pleasure to be here.
All right, Sky community, thank you for listening to another episode. This episode was sponsored by Sky Women's Health. As a reminder, we're in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and we help relieve back pain and pelvic pain in pregnancy and beyond. If you are pregnant and having pain and you feel like you have no reliable way to relieve it, look us up at skywomenshealth.com, request an appointment, and we'll call to get you scheduled. As a board-certified OBGYN with a Neuromusculoskeletal Medicine Fellowship, I help you realign with hands-on drug-free treatment and relieve pain on the spot without medication. We'll help you maintain these results through your pregnancy and postpartum period. Every pregnant person deserves this, and we are so excited to serve you. You can find us on our website, as mentioned, or on social at Sky Women's Health, or you can call the office at 817-915-9803. That's it for today. Until next week, be well.